Tonight, a Sky News investigation exposes how Europe is inadvertently funding Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And the UK is at the heart of it all, ensuring and sometimes owning the ships needed for the lucrative trade.
It's thanks to British financiers that Vladimir Putin is able to keep sending Russian gas to Europe, earning billions of euros along the way for his war effort.
This evening, I'll ask the Russian ambassador to the UK why his government is still dependent on Europe's billions if, as he claims, the economy is thriving. And we'll also have the latest from Washington as Donald Trump's hush money sentencing is delayed and the first Democrat publicly calls for Joe Biden to go. Let's talking more action. The message from the Caribbean to Western leaders as climate change is blamed for a monster hurricane battering the region. We'll be live in northern India after 100 people were crushed to death at a religious festival. And we hear from Kenya's young protesters back on the streets, but this time they're demanding something different. That's all coming up on The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Welcome to the programme. It's the codependent relationship no one wants to talk about. Not the UK, not Europe, and definitely not Russia. Europe was quick to pledge it would wean itself off Russian oil after the invasion of Ukraine. But this ship, carrying liquefied natural gas or LNG to Western Europe, proves just how much both sides need each other, no matter what they say in public. Every week, icebreakers sail back and forth with impunity. LNG bound for Europe is not included in the comprehensive sanctions regime. And the EU is now Russia's biggest customer. Why? Because Europe doesn't want to risk another economic shock. And because Moscow needs the billions that its trade generates from its war in Ukraine. But no leader will admit that out loud, not even the Russian ambassador, who today told me that business is business. You'll hear our conversation in a moment. But let's get started with that expose from our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, about a murky trade with the UK at its centre.
Miles out in the sea lanes, where the North Sea meets the English Channel, a lone ship on the horizon. The cargo it carries tells a murky tale, one which takes us from the Arctic Ocean north of Siberia to the shores of Europe and eventually to the front lines of the war in Ukraine.
We aim to reduce this dependency on Russian fossil fuels and to get rid of it.
To wean ourselves off dependence on Russian oil and gas.
But this is the story of what really happened after Europe promised to end its reliance on Russian gas.
Stop the war, respect international order.
We are determined to stand up against Russia's brutal war.
Because it turns out Europe isn't just helping Ukraine, but also helping fund Putin. I've come to Belgium, to the port of Zeebrugge, one of the biggest liquefied natural gas, LNG, terminals in Europe. On the hunt for the energy story no one wants to talk about. Because while the amount of gas coming in pipes from Russia is down, the amount of gas coming in on LNG tankers is up a lot. And this is one of those tankers, a ship I've been tracking for months, the Vladimir Rusanov.
Steve, we're getting closer now. That ship was in Siberia 7 days ago, and it's heading to Zeebrugge with its shipment of liquefied natural gas for the European market. And if you want to understand how it is that Vladimir Putin is able to finance his war effort, well, what you're looking at there is part of the explanation.
Britain has banned these shipments, but the UK is also a part of this for another reason.
You know the most striking thing of all? That ship is actually insured by a British company. In other words, it's thanks to British financiers that Vladimir Putin is able to keep sending Russian gas to Europe, earning billions of euros along the way for his war effort.
While British insurers are banned from protecting oil tankers taking Russian crude, there's no equivalent sanction on Russian gas. The UK P&I Club, which insures the Vladimir Rusinov and a number of other LNG carriers, said the direct carriage of LNG from Yamal to Zeebrugge and provision of insurance services for such carriage is not presently sanctioned. If the EU and G7 nations were to change their policy, the club would of course comply by adjusting or withdrawing its services. Down the coast in Dunkirk is another tanker I've been tracking, the Yakov Gakel. And it's a similar story, European money and British services facilitating the ongoing flow of Russian hydrocarbons. Except here, the British connection is even more direct.
This ship, it's got a Russian name, it's got Russian gas, but it's actually part owned and operated by a British company.
Our investigation shows that while Britain has banned any ships with a Russian connection from docking on our shores, this country is still a critical cog in the wheel that helps keep them running. These ships are just two of a large fleet of icebreakers making the same journey from Siberia to Western European ports.
So we've been constantly tracking these ships as they go back and forth. So that green thing there, that is Yamal. That's basically where the Russian liquefied natural gas actually gets liquefied and gets put into these tankers. All the time, it's this constant trade back and forth, Russia to Europe, Russia to Europe.
And Seapeak, the British company behind the Yakov Gakel, also operates 4 more of these tankers. We tried emailing them and calling them,
Glasgow reception is currently unavailable.
to no avail.
Please leave a message after the tone.
If at this stage you're thinking, didn't Europe stop its imports of Russian fossil fuels? The answer is yes when it comes to coal and to oil. After sanctions, they are now mostly going to China. But Europe is still the biggest customer by far for Russian liquefied natural gas, paying billions of euros to the very country on which they're waging economic war. And while it this week imposed sanctions on LNG, that will only affect the stuff being shipped via Europe, not the gas going to Europe. And while the UK didn't receive this LNG directly, its businesses helped it happen. That brings us to Glasgow, where our trail that began in the Channel has led us. Seapeak, the company which runs that tanker, didn't respond to my calls, so I've come in person to see if I can persuade them to talk.
Hi, hello. Hi, my name's Ed Conway. I work for Sky News, and we've come to talk to Seapeak. We're making a story. Do you want him to turn that off? Okay, right. Okay, we'll turn that off. Or do you want to go outside? Yeah. We've been calling, and we've been told that, well, no one is replying to us, and so that's why we've come here.
Stay there, will you, please?
Sure. Thank you.
It's worth saying, as far as we can tell, there's nothing illegal about running these tankers, even though they're helping bolster the Russian regime. It's one of many loopholes in Britain's sanctions regime. Even so, the company running the vessels still not willing to speak.
They've given you a message to me, which is basically go away, is it?
You don't have an appointment, so you can't speak to them.
Right, okay. Is anyone going to come down and talk to us?
No.
No? And even if we stay here all day and we're waiting...
Stay here, I'll phone the police.
You'll phone the police? Well, basically, they don't want to talk. They say no one can speak to them without an appointment. We've called and they haven't wanted to give us an appointment, so I guess that's just they don't want to talk about it at all, which is kind of disappointing.
And for the time being, that is more or less that.
We must help Ukraine to rise from the ashes and to be the master of its own future.
Europe keeps importing Russian gas in ships managed and insured by British companies, paying the Putin regime billions of euros in the process. Russia keeps bombing Ukraine with weapons paid for in part from the proceeds. Few find this very palatable, but since the alternative is to risk another energy price shock, there's little appetite to end this murky trade.
Ed Conway with that report, and you can read more of that report on our website. Well, earlier I spoke to the Russian ambassador to the UK, Andrei Kelin, and to be honest, I didn't expect him to respond specifically to Ed's investigation. He told me that business is business, that the money made from exporting LNG was a small portion of the national budget. He also gave quite a frank assessment of the two main parties in the UK election. You'll hear that exchange in a moment. But first, let's just hear what he had to say about the impact of Western sanctions.
Of course, it is bad and not pleasant. It is very irritating when each round of sanctions has been announced. We have now about 2,500 people under sanctions. But damage to the economics is nearly null. Damage to our policy, we didn't change our policy line at all. Speaking about economics, of course, business is finding ways how to deal with the sanctions. The GDP growth of last year was 3.6%. We expect approximately same ciphers this year. What about Britain? Where is it growing? It's around plus minus some 0.5%. Same as in Germany, same as in France, probably at least slightly better. So
it's also...
where is the damage of sanctions? Definitely it is damaging the originators of the sanctions because they are illegal. The illegal sanctions has been done only by the United Nations. Illegal sanctions are damaging mostly to those originators.
What do you call these sanctions then? The West has opened its toolbox, imposed sanctions over 2 years on Russia, and yet we're still seeing the sale of Russian gas to Europe.
The goal of the sanctions was, first of all, to spoil normal life of Russians. So they will say that Putin is wrong and that we will need a revolt. The second point of sanctions was to damage Russian economy as much as possible. The third point was to change the political course of it. So none of these goals has been reached by the sanctions.
And billions made to fund the war effort against Ukraine. So by purchasing the gas, in a way, by Russia making billions as a result, they're funding their war effort.
It's just a small portion of the budget which is measured now in trillions of whatever it is, euros, dollars, or pounds, or rubles. The budget is big.
But just tell me, why is Russia still selling its gas then to Europe? Why not stop? But why not stop? If you feel you're not just at war with Ukraine, you're at war with the West because the West is supplying weapons to Ukraine, why not stop selling your gas to Europe? It will push inflation prices up, for example. You could have, your foot on Europe's neck if you wanted to.
No, we don't.
Why the dependence? Is it a codependence?
We are not so greedy as Europe it is.
But why continue selling the gas and keeping European homes warm if you don't need the money?
There is no ideology in it. We are selling it, most of our gas, we are selling to China, to India, to South Korea, and as well as to
15% of it's still going to Europe.
Perhaps, yes. Why not? Why not if they are buying? So the businessmen. This is pure business. I think there's no politics. We did not sanction Europe for purchasing anything from us.
Is it because you're still dependent on their billions for your war, for your own economy?
No. It is incomparable things.
I want to talk about the upcoming elections here because Russia has been accused of election interference. I mean, it's been accused in 2016 of interfering in the US elections. Now there are investigations by journalists that Russia is interfering in the upcoming UK elections. Your response to that?
My response, yes, I read this story. It's a story that some Australians have discovered that in Nigeria they have set up some boats and Vietnamese are listening to these boats. Do you think that this really can influence elections in United Kingdom? My view is that the Conservative Party is quickly losing its electorate and its chances for the future. And it is now trying to grab anything. And even these false stories, which has nothing to do with realities, are now put on the surface.
The 5 coordinated Facebook pages that the Australian Broadcasting Corporation says Russia is influencing have been spouting, they say, Kremlin talking points and expressing support for Nigel Farage's Reform UK party. So it's not about the Conservative Party, it's about spouting support for Nigel Farage's party.
No, we do not see any point in supporting anyone here in these elections because, first of all, the program of the Labourist Party does not deviate from the program of the Conservatives at all. It is all the same. In the foreign policy, you do not have see any difference.
But I want to specifically ask you about the comments that Nigel Farage has made.
I have done this.
No, I know. I want you to be specific because he has said it's a consequence of EU and NATO expansion and we, as in the West, have provoked this war. Your response to Nigel Farage?
Some of these points are correct, that how many? 9 waves of enlargement of NATO, against which we protested very heartily and trying to show that it is detrimental for European security, has done, and now it has led us to where we stand. It has led us to the crisis, major crisis in Europe.
So then that takes me back to Rishi Sunak's point that Nigel Farage, by making these sorts of remarks, plays into Vladimir Putin's hand. Do you think that Vladimir Putin welcomes these sorts of comments by
I hardly
leaders?
I hardly imagine that he knows the name at all.
If Vladimir Putin truly had, and we've spoken about the elections in the past, 87% approval rating and, you know, he got that kind of result during the election as well, why crack down on protests? Why crack down on the media? Why silence those voices of dissent within Russia if morale is so high?
Let us deal it one by one. Yes, he did not crack on media. Why do you think so? What kind of media he cracked on?
I mean, a woman holds a
media.
banner on the television saying no war, and she's arrested. For example, protesters in the street are arrested for protesting against the war, or if they express concern about the death of
an
Alexei
interesting
Navalny.
thing. It is coming back to Nigel Farage. He has expressed some point of view which deviates from the point of view of the government, and he was criticized from all the sides.
He also may become an MP after Wednesday, after
no one knows.
Thursday.
He tried 4 times.
but he
was
might
amazed.
miss time, and I mean,
I was
that
amazed,
is
really.
democracy
I
playing
was
itself
amazed
out.
how strong censorship is in this country, because there is no possibility for any alternative view. Just to put a hand out of it and to say something.
He can say what he likes. People can respond to him. He may become an MP after the election.
Yes.
That is not something that is possible
we
in
have
Russia.
a lot of people. No, it is absolutely possibility we have, because I'm reading much more than you in our internet and all the others. I know that people is freely expressing.
And journalists like Evan Gershkovich, for example, who remain in a Russian prison for working for the Wall Street Journal.
Because he was spying. It is not a secret that some journalists all around the world, let it be, I will not name the names and the countries, that journalists are used for spying. So Gershkovich has been used for spying in the heart of our, it's in Sverdlovsk, Yekaterinburg, which is producing a lot of military equipment, including tanks. He was caught on the spot doing his job.
You're not using him as some kind of political pawn to release prisoners?
This is not a question to me, it's a question to those who are dealing with that.
I guess, you know, when you talk about there is freedom and elections proved that Vladimir Putin is very popular and morale is very high, and yet, like I said, journalists from the West are frightened when they're in Russia because of the laws that have been imposed as a result of speaking out against the war in Ukraine, for example, protesting against the war in Ukraine, political prisoners who remain in prison, and those who have left the country as a result of the war as well.
Okay, Russian journalists here, they are deprived of using banks. They are followed every time, and they have a lot of limitation in these countries. Let's abandon all of that. I'm just standing for this. Let's make journalists in all of our countries free. But first step should be done perhaps here. Because conditions of our journalists living here are terrible, of course.
Donald Trump has said, should he return to power, he can end this war between Ukraine and Russia in 24 hours. What do you think about that?
Hardly. First of all, he should be in the office. Second is that a lot of efforts should be done to do this. And that depends on what kind of terms it is going to happen.
What does a peace deal then look like if you're saying you're gaining more and more territory?
Ukraine should be not member of NATO, non-nuclear, nuclear-free. Of course, it should be demilitarized in a sense of the level of weapons should be diminished. Rights of Russians should be reestablished totally. It should be a friendly nation for us. And the territorial gains should be recognized, of course.
I mean, we've had this conversation around, whether Ukraine can be part of NATO or not. As a sovereign state, they should be able to make the choices they want to make.
We do not believe in a peaceful NATO at all. We believe that NATO is a dangerous organization. Okay?
Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Yalda.
That's Russia's ambassador to the UK, Andriy Kellen, speaking to me a little earlier today. Now, we've got some breaking news tonight. Sentencing in Donald Trump's hush money case has been delayed from July to September. Let's bring in our US correspondent, James Matthews. And James, we're all geared up for this potential sentencing next week, July the 11th. It's now been pushed to September.
That's right, Yalda. Yeah, September the 18th. This is because of a Supreme Court ruling yesterday. You'll remember that the Supreme Court justices, they ruled that for a president, there can be immunity from criminal prosecution for official acts, if not for acts deemed unofficial. Within hours, Trump's lawyers went to the New York judge who convicted him, or presided over his conviction a couple of weeks ago, and they said, look, because of this immunity ruling, we think the conviction should be set aside because there was evidence presented to the jury that falls into the category of official acts. Donald Trump was in office when some of that evidence, for which some of that evidence is relevant. Paperwork, tweets, public statements, tweets about Michael Cohen, the star witness, paperwork relating to financial disclosures whilst Donald Trump was president. So essentially they're saying they want to go to the court and argue that the conviction should be overturned because of this immunity ruling, because Donald Trump was acting officially. The defense, or the prosecution rather, they've said, okay, let's proceed. They've agreed to a hearing, but they reckon that the argument of Trump lawyers is without merit. In terms of the practical effect of this, for many critics, it will be, of course, a test of what they regard as a fundamental risk to democracy and to the rule of law in this country. Practically, politically, it will mean that no more is the sentencing taking place just days before the Republican National Convention, at which Donald Trump will be anointed as the Republican Party nominee. That was looming large over that particular event, no longer.
Yeah, James, so that's Donald Trump. And I guess, we can also say now that Joe Biden's future remains uncertain too. We've had the first Democrat in Congress come out and publicly say that he should step aside.
Yes, Democrats breaking ranks in public. That particular congressman saying that what he doesn't want is the election to be delivered by Joe Biden to Donald Trump. That is seen as a real risk within Democratic ranks. And, the sense of crisis around Joe Biden has deepened. It has become embedded in the 5 days since that TV debate. Many Democrats are screaming for Joe Biden to come out and to confound the concerns about his well-being, whether that be with a news conference, taking questions, a series of interviews, something that demonstrates the fundamental agility required of a president and their candidate. He has been out and about, but only in front of teleprompters in the past 24 hours, pre-prepared statements without taking questions from waiting reporters. He was at the DC Emergency Center earlier today, Yalda. Let's listen to some of what he was saying.
Unfortunately, my predecessor and the MAGA Republicans in Congress are trying to undo all this progress. They still deny climate change even exists. They deny climate change even exists. They must be living in a hole somewhere at the expense of health and safety of their own constituents.
It is an increasing concern for Democrats. What will worry them more today are fresh polls that indicate that since the TV debate, Joe Biden has slipped further behind Donald Trump.
James, as always, thank you so much. You're watching The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Still to come, the latest from India, where a stampede has killed more than 100 people at a religious festival. And Jamaica braces for the arrival of a Category 5 hurricane that's already killed at least 4 people in the Caribbean.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers. We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
I'm Dan Whitehead, and I'm Sky's West of England correspondent.
I'm Katie Spencer, and I'm Sky News' arts and entertainment correspondent. We help you to understand the world with us.
I'm Adam Parsons, I'm Sky's Europe correspondent, based here in Brussels. We take you to the heart of stories that shape our world.
I'm Lisa Dowd, and I'm one of Sky's Midlands correspondents. The reason I do this job is because you never know where it's going to lead.
Welcome back. At least 110 people have been killed and over 150 injured after a stampede at a religious gathering in India. The crush reportedly happened when people rushed to leave the event in the Hathras district of Uttar Pradesh. Our India reporter Neville Lazarus has more.
Dozens of bodies of women and children kept coming in on pickup trucks to the trauma center, while scores of injured, some critical, overwhelmed the hospitals in the district of Hathras. A religious gathering of tens of thousands became a death trap when the crowd surged towards Bhole Baba, a preacher, when he ended his function. Soon after, a stampede followed as followers tried to leave the venue.
People started falling one upon another, one upon another. Those who were crushed died. People there pulled them out.
Emergency arrangements for the safety and security of such large numbers at the venue was almost non-existent. The preacher, who is now gone missing, has been holding such events for over 2 decades. His followers are mainly Dalits, the marginalized class and the vulnerable poor in rural India. Speaking in Parliament, Prime Minister Modi expressed his concerns.
I wish a speedy recovery to all the injured. The administration, under the supervision of the state government, is carrying out rescue and relief operations. Through this House, I assure everyone that the victims will be provided all help.
A police case has been registered against the preacher and organizers, and the state government has ordered an inquiry into the incident with the promise of compensation. But for the families of the victims, the loss is immeasurable.
And Neville joins me now from Hathras in northern India. I mean, Neville, these numbers are so incredibly high. And as you say, the majority of them women and children.
That's true. Overwhelmingly, they are women and children who have paid this price. Out of the 116, over 106 are women, and there are children included in that. We've seen, since we've been here, we've seen a number of ambulances bringing bodies still. It's about 1 o'clock in the morning, and this incident happened in the afternoon, and bodies are still being brought. One person, a man who I spoke to, he has lost his 8-year-old child, his wife, and his mother's body is still missing. So these numbers will rise. There are 3 main hospitals to where these bodies and the injured have been brought to. The preacher, Bhole Baba, has been missing. There's been a police case against him. He's been missing, but he seems to have done these kinds of programs for the last 20 years. And it's the negligence of not only the administration, but also of him and his people who conduct these without proper safety and security for the followers. And these are the tragedies most of the families have had to pay in this terrible sort of tragedy that has taken place in Hathras today.
Yeah, a real tragedy, as you say. Neville, thank you so much. Next, the devastating and deadly impact of Hurricane Beryl, which is pummeling the Caribbean after making landfall in the southeast. Beryl claimed the lives of at least 4 people across Grenada and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. It's now at sea, having weakened slightly to a Category 4 hurricane, but is now expected to hit the island of Jamaica directly. Our science correspondent Thomas Moore has this report.
Hurricane Beryl tore into Grenada and ripped it to pieces. 165-mile-an-hour winds sent debris cartwheeling through the streets. Several deaths have been reported as the storm pummeled the eastern Caribbean. The Prime Minister of St. Vincent said on one, 90% of houses had been severely damaged or destroyed. Survivors could scarcely believe what they'd seen.
You're really just hoping for the best, and all around me there were houses in the village. Their roofs were flying past, you could see it passing.
Scientists have flown into the hurricane's eye and through the violent wall of wind on its edge. Never before in recorded history has the Caribbean been battered by a storm this strong, this early in the year. And that's largely because of the sea temperature along the hurricane's track. The orange on this chart indicates water that's 2 or even 3 degrees warmer than normal, heat and energy that has fueled the extraordinary vortex.
In terms of ocean heat content, it looks like the peak of hurricane season. It's the second week of September. It's pretty astounding.
Beryl is forecast to weaken as it moves west from Grenada, but still bring life-threatening hurricane-strength winds to Jamaica on Wednesday, then easing further before it hits the Cayman Islands on Thursday and Mexico south of Cancun on Friday. A wall of water between 1 and 2 metres high is being pushed ahead of the storm, with as much as 30 centimetres of rain possible in a matter of hours. The Prime Minister of Jamaica urged people to heed warnings.
We have 48 hours in which to prepare, because it is easier to be prepared when you're standing on your 2 feet than when you are in the midst of a hurricane.
Between 4 and 7 major hurricanes are expected from now to November. Normally there would be 3. Beryl could just be a taste of what's to come. Thomas Moore, Sky News.
Well, joining me now is Michael Taylor, climate scientist at the University of the West Indies. Thank you so much, Professor, for joining us here on the programme. You're in Jamaica at the moment, where you're expecting this hurricane to make landfall tomorrow. It really feels like a race against time.
Absolutely. I mean, we really have very little time to prepare. And that's one of the challenges that we face in the region. We're getting these really superstorms, unprecedented, with limited time to prepare. And it's a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, we keep hearing this word unprecedented. It also almost feels like the new normal.
And you know, as a climate scientist, one of the ways we have been reading things like, you know, the various reports that come out of the UN's IPCC, you know, is that the big message for us in the region is that the unprecedented is becoming inescapable. So here we are again in a hurricane season where the unprecedented faces us. We have a storm that rapidly intensified, moving from a disturbance to a category 3 in under 48 hours, and then to category 4. But this isn't the first time we're seeing unprecedented. We saw it in 2017 with 3 category 5s. We saw it in 2019 with Superstorm Dorian. We saw it in 2020 when we exhausted the names of the alphabet. And so for us, the big take home, or the big reading of climate science, is that the unprecedented is becoming inescapable, you know, and we have to now learn to live with this normal. And we're only talking storms here. There are other variations of unprecedented, including extreme heat.
Yes. And we've seen that. We saw that last summer here in Europe, the extreme heat. As you say, these examples keep emerging of these situations that we keep describing as unprecedented, and this call to action, and yet very little seems to change.
And you know, what we, as small islands, the small islands have been championing the need for urgent action. And the other way I would want to argue that we read the science is that urgent has now become immediate. We really need, as a globe, all of the things that we talk about as urgent: mitigation to reduce greenhouse gases, to you know, so that we face at best a 1.5 or 2 degree world. We need that now. It's no longer urgent; it's immediate. Adaptation, you know, and the ability to adapt to a world that is less than safe at 2 degrees. And certainly, you know, things like the new loss and damage fund. How will countries like mine or the others in the Eastern Caribbean recover from this? There is a real call for the urgent now to become the immediate.
Yeah, indeed. Professor Michael Taylor, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Next up on the programme, we'll be live in Nairobi after riot police clash with protesters calling on the president to resign. Let's turn to Kenya now. Riot police have fired tear gas at protesters demonstrating in the capital Nairobi and calling for President William Ruto to resign. It follows weeks of unrest, which have seen dozens of people killed in clashes with police since last month. Our Africa correspondent Yusra El-Bagir reports from Nairobi.
It's a rush to treat the injured, the ones who didn't make it out of the chaos unscathed. Unarmed protesters sustained gunshot wounds after they faced off against police in Kenya, and others choked on the plumes of tear gas. It's a hard-fought battle here in the streets of the capital. And when they manage to gather, their message is clear. They want President William Ruto to resign.
We want him to go home. We don't want him. Our country will be okay if he's not here. We want a peaceful country. We want to see us develop. We don't want to be here at tunaandamana kila Tuesday. This is not what we want to do. We want jobs. We want money. We can't be doing this every single week because he wants to lie to us every single day. And killing innocent people and abducting them. This is nonsense.
We can come on the streets every day if that's what Ruto wants.
And this is the response.
These are now regular scenes in the streets of Nairobi. Riot police facing off against unarmed protesters who are challenging the state's power.
Even on the quieter streets, the police pluck people from the pavement. This truck has 7 arrested men inside.
I just want to understand, what does it take for you to arrest people? What makes you arrest people?
One officer tells us they just looked suspicious, and another says it's for protesting.
Stop and stop killing us!
The Kenyan constitution allows for peaceful demonstrations, but the Kenyan National Human Rights Commission says there have been over 600 arrests of protesters since the 18th of June, and over 32 cases of abduction.
I mean, they didn't want anyone to know where I was, right? So I later discovered that that was the instruction the cops were given at Kajiado police station. Don't allow anyone, don't agree that this guy is here, even though I was there.
Prominent commentator Gabriel Guda has been arrested before, but says this time was different.
But this time, no one knew where I was. No one knew me in Kajiado, right? And it was at night. You know what? At night, anything can happen.
So do you think the government will be able to quell these protests?
If these kids continue for as long as it takes, I think it's the government that will back down.
The spirit of change has been ignited and the Kenyan flag raised. Whether or not Ruto resigns, history here has been made.
As you saw in our report, young people are taking to the streets in Kenya time and time again, calling for President William Ruto to resign and calling out the bad governance that they see as stopping them from having the lives they deserve. They want jobs, they want an end to corruption, and they're planning to keep calling out the government until they see a change. And now Kenya, one of the most stable and biggest economies in Africa, is going through a time of turbulence. And every day, the lines are drawn deeper in the sand.
Yusra, thank you, as always, for all of your reporting there. This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Next up, the UN is forced to defend its decision to organise talks with the Taliban without the involvement of Afghan women.
Sailing is something that I can do despite my disabilities. So when I was injured, we didn't know what I could do. My dad came and gave me an email address with the Paralympic development coach's emails on it. And that sort of spurred the refocus of my rehabilitation. I then began sailing professionally. And when in 2020 was our aim for the Paralympic Games, it was taken out of the Paralympic Games. We found that out in 2015. I was then invited on a boat and I sort of fell in love with the cruising lifestyle of it. I was like, oh, I can do this. This can be something I can get very good at. And so again, it was another element of, I can do this despite my disability. In intensive care, the first few weeks in intensive care actually, my mum gave me a hard lesson. Love her to bits for it. She basically said, after all the crying, then what? And I couldn't argue it, and the logic is sound. Yeah, I could either lay in bed crying all day or I could refocus. Well, for the past 7 years, I have been taking the steps towards it. So this is, however, the biggest ocean on the planet.
Yeah.
And it will take me a minimum of 60 days, upwards of 80. And there may be times when I'm facing waves as big as double-decker buses. I may be in winds that are able to rip trees out. So I need to plan. Now, this is not a small feat. This is part of the reason why I'm doing this challenge. Anybody's going to find this difficult. So the aim is to prove that I can do it as a triple amputee, despite the challenges. The boat needs to be set up, which is quite a vital part. If the boat's not ready, how can I be? So we're getting all of the fundraising together right now, just to make sure that I've got all of the things necessary, all of the vital equipment to get me across this ocean.
You've got a crowdfunder set up, and I'm going to let people know it's the crowdfunder website, and it's Craigwood Sales. It's just up on the screen now. There it is, the page, sailing solo from Mexico to Japan.
Welcome back. Since the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan in August 2021, the country has faced isolation and sanctions. But that could all now change with plans to reintegrate the South Asian nation into the international community. But missing from the room and the conversation, women. Well, the Taliban representatives met with delegations from at least 30 countries in Doha at talks backed by the United Nations. Women were left out at the Taliban's request. The UN has defended its position. Just have a listen to this.
We faced a very tough, maybe impossible choice in organizing this meeting. We have a mandate to support this process. Our belief was to bring the de facto authorities and special envoys together for direct talks.
Well, today the UN met with a group of female activists to talk about the barriers they continue to face, including the ban on education and participation in public life. Many women decided not to attend, describing the talks as tokenistic and rushed. Rehana Karim was one of those women. She is the CEO of the Khadija Project, an organization based in Kabul focusing on the protection of Afghan women. Thank you so much, Rehana, for joining us here on the program. As I said, you didn't attend these talks. You were invited to go. Just tell me why.
I refuse to attend these talks as a protest to what appears to be a rushed attempt by the UN for a show of inclusion. The event today is organized after the official format on the sidelines of the official Doha meeting. It's a rushed attempt to invite civil society, and it doesn't allow for meaningful equal participation of Afghan civil society, especially women, in a forum where their future is at stake. It sets a very dangerous precedent for the UN to exclude the Afghan civil society from these talks, and I will simply refuse to be tokenized in a show of inclusion by the UN.
Yeah, what sort of message does this send? Because the UN and others have said this is not necessarily a path to normalization. This is about a phase and part of a process of opening the dialogue, and that this was a difficult decision for them, but there will be future opportunities.
We understand that there is one undeniable truth, which is that the Afghan people right now are suffering from 3 years of political deadlock. They are suffering from this lack of engagement between the DFA and the international community, as a consequence of which humanitarian aid has drastically decreased. There is no development funding for Afghanistan at the moment, and human rights and women's rights are facing more and more violations and restrictions every day. There is no doubt that this engagement is necessary. However, it cannot be done by sacrificing inclusion of women in the process. We cannot do this at the cost of principled engagement and go against the UN's own standards of engaging the Afghan women from this process.
And I guess that's what's most baffling about this entire process, that at the end of the day, Afghan women who I've spoken to and have met in Kabul after the Taliban took over told me they feel betrayed, they feel abandoned by the international community. They haven't gone, girls over the age of 12 haven't gone to school for over 1,000 days. Women can't take their children to parks, for example. They can't go to university. They can't participate in public life. And they seem to be sacrificed and thrown under the bus yet again.
Absolutely. I think what is most worrying for us to observe is that there is a pattern of the international community over-complying and feeding into the slippery slope of over-complying with the Taliban's demands. We have seen it at the last Doha talks when they said that next time we will make better conditions for the Taliban to attend. They did that by excluding women from the conversation this time. We have seen it over and over again. It seems like Afghan women are constantly used as leverage, as political leverage. The Afghan people are held hostage of this situation, while there is no real progress made to hear from them and take their inputs and their needs and their challenges into the general conversation to progress in the situation.
Rehana, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. That's all for tonight's programme. Tonight, we're live in northern India, in Washington, in the Kenyan capital, and in Jamaica as Hurricane Beryl bears down. Thanks so much for watching the programme. The news at 10 is next. Good night.